Hey guys, it's Chris from HeadwayRocket.com, and I'm back today with another State of the Rocket update for 2016. Um, Today I'll be talking about the new uh, Headway Rocket site, and just quickly going over the reasons why I didn't use Headway for this version, and quickly go over some of the tools that I'm using. I'm going to try and keep it short. It's quite late and my brains are um, already fried. But I will, yeah, it's just, I'm going to try and zip through everything as quickly as possible. So, firstly, in terms of why I'm not using Headway, I, gave it loads of thought and while I could have very easily built the site on Headway, um, I opted to go for something different. Being a front end developer, I'm always, trying to stay on top of my game and test out like different technologies and something I've been interested in for a while and haven't really had an opportunity to properly get my hands stuck in is building static sites, but not static sites of the old, where you would kind of write every single page um, as a separate file. Obviously going that approach would be a bit of a maintenance nightmare. But luckily, the tools have caught on, and now we're able to build static sites quite intelligently, and you don't have any of the kind of major drawbacks that you would have had traditionally. Um, and again, so just to quickly summarize the reason with why I'm not using Headway, it's coming down to choosing the right tool for the job. And being someone of my skill set, having a visual editor doesn't necessarily always make sense. For me personally, I actually prefer just working in the code, and um, the even with using something like Headway, it's pretty well optimized out of the box. But when it comes to things like the markup that's been generated, I'm quite pedantic. I want to make sure that every single um, if there's a class on a div, it's because I added it there because I need it, not because the system generated it for me. And building static and starting from a blank slate where every single line of markup is there because I added it is really quite refreshing, and it's been really fun to work on. And it definitely doesn't mean that this is something that I'll be using for all of the sites that I build. WordPress is definitely still got its advantages, but I can definitely see a place for sites where you don't need to be modifying the content so much. Even though you do, even if you do, there's a tool I'll be looking at in a second, which kind of bridges that gap. But for most part, it's like small marketing sites or even basic company pages where they're not going to be modifying, the client's not going to be modifying the content. Um, but yeah, just the speed that I'm able to kind of go from a design to a fully working concept, especially with really great front end libraries like UIKit, which are very modular in how they've been um, designed. So you're able to just take the individual components that you need, and you've got a fully working site that's responsive and crazy fast. So that was kind of the idea with HeadwayRocket. I wanted to try something new and um, have a live testing ground that I'm actually you know using for an actual site. So that's the reasoning. Now I'm going to look at the just some of the tools that I've adopted for this specific build. And first up, we're going to look at Hammer. Um, and this unfortunately it's a Mac only application. So the Windows users, which I know many of Headway are, um, this wouldn't be relevant even if you were keen on kind of trying out code, unless you've got a Mac. But if you do have a Mac and you're feeling adventurous, it's worthwhile taking a look. It's very well documented as well. But so yeah, this is the interface, and these are the projects down the side. You're able to actually start with a bunch of preset templates. So you can kind of have a boilerplate starting point that you start with. I'm actually working on one for UIKit, specifically for like static site development, but yeah, more on that later. But this is kind of gives you a breakdown of exactly like each of the individual files that have been created. As you can see, there's quite a few, and this links to my editor, and there's an option to automatically optimize all of the assets, so you can have while you're developing the site, having like all your CSS broken up into different logical sections or partials, and then when you actually compile everything and optimize it, you'll have a single JavaScript and a single CSS file that's been minified. And so yeah, that's pretty much Hammer. There's a lot more to it. There's but the most of the cool stuff really comes down to the code. But we'll look at that next. So let me just switch over to the editor. So this is my project now for the new HeadwayRocket, and you'll see a lot of these files are end in the extension slim, which is for slim language, slim markup. And if we take a look at one of these files, this is the about page, and you'll see that it's kind of like shorthand HTML. So instead of having normally in HTML, you'd have the opening and closing tag. So for example, the main tag, you'd have an opening and closing one. And then this div over here would have a closing div at the bottom. So this just kind of allows me to write shorthand. It just is a lot more concise, and definitely makes a lot more kind of I find easier to scan through the document. And it just uses indentation as a way to create the document structure. But obviously there's a lot more to it. It's quite a like an intricate language, mostly used in Ruby on Rails. Hammer actually uses Ruby to kind of bring in all the different individual tools that it utilizes. And then over here you can see this is an example of, this is like a partial include. So if I go to my includes folder and I go to the header, we can see that this is a header element with a centered container. And yeah, so if we look at like the plugins, the plugins file, it's got the grid container opening and then an actual for each loop. So it's saying for every plugin in Cockpit plugins. So Cockpit is what I'll be talking about next, but this again is just an example of things that normally if we were building a static website, you'd have to have all of that HTML for every single one of the plugins, and it would have made the file like really long and quite cumbersome to work within, whereas this is just really nice and concise. And what that's going to do is it's just going to go and check in Cockpit plugins, and every time it finds a plugin, it'll then go and output it using this plugin include. And when there aren't any left, then it just won't output anything. I'm not going to actually show you, because I originally was going to make a change and let you see it sort of take place on the site, but obviously that would require giving you a preview of the new design, but that's going to have to wait for Sunday. And so the next thing I'm just going to show you before I end off is what makes this kind of viable, because on its own, if I was going to have um, the even if I had individual files for each of the different products and each of the different posts, it would still be quite cumbersome to work with, even with all of the amazing tools um, that Hammer gives us. Um, and that is Cockpit. And Cockpit is what's commonly referred to as a headless CMS. And what that means is it's kind of like WordPress without the front end. So imagine the dashboard where you manage your content, but none of the front end stuff. So none of the none of the themes, none of the plugins even. It's just really focuses 100% on the content. Um, you may have heard of, there's quite a few alternatives out there. One of the popular ones is Contentful, which I did look at, and one of the early prototypes I created was using it. But the pricing model is a bit steep. It kind of goes from $0 to $99 quite quickly. And one of the kind of goals with this whole new stack is to reduce my monthly expenditure. Cockpit is a free open source project that you can download, and so long as you've got a local development environment, so if you're on Windows and you've got something like WAMP or one of the alternatives, or if you're on Mac and you've got MAMP or Anvil, which is also created by the same guys who created Hammer. So long as you've got that local development environment set up, then installing it is literally a case of downloading the zip file from the site, getcockpit.com. As you can see, they've got a really nice site as well. And you'll see that actually by default, when you install Cockpit, it actually has, it doesn't have galleries anymore, but it has a whole section of, creating different forms that you can use on your website, and then regions, which is also kind of like the partials, HTML partials that I mentioned before in Hammer. But in this case, in how I'm using it, because I'm only using it to input the content and then using Hammer to actually pull that in, none of these two are actually used. So I just went to the modules folder and deleted those two folders, and all trace of them were gone. And so now I've just got the collections and the content, but I'll look at that next. So this is the admin that I have for HeadwayRocket, and as you can see, I've created a couple of collections, guides. So that's the new unified, updated setup guides for each of the plugins and templates, and then the plugins product page. So that's the blocks, contact features, gallery, testimonials, and then the posts is for the blog, and then templates is the Headway template product pages, and then test I'm just using to test out the different field types and combinations, just because it's still getting my head around the system. But so yeah, as you can see, this is the dashboard, and we've got this hover menu which you can have shortcuts to different collections. Normally, if you had the other modules activated, you would see them here, and you'd be able to go to the forms. But again, I'm not using those. So also, there's the assets, which I'm not using because I'd prefer having the assets structured in my Hammer project, and I'm using folder structures and variables to kind of create predictive paths. To kind of automate quite a lot of the image handling. So I'm not using any of the assets, and even the accounts, I'm the only one using it because it's just installed on my local machine. But you could technically install it, like I could just drag this onto my DigitalOcean droplet and have it accessible via custom URL or a subdomain. So if you were going to use this for something like for clients, and you wanted to make it so that they could actually update their websites and still have it output as static, then you would use this in a hosted environment. But for me, I didn't want to have anything that connected online, and that was when I first spoke to Steve from Forge and uh, Hammer, was the fact that, like, when I was using the contentful integration, um, every time Hammer had to compile, it would have to go and check contentful, and like, created some serious lag time. And obviously you want the workflow to be as efficient as possible. Um, so in the end, I ended up they ended up getting it working with Cockpit, which is installed locally, so it means there's no request needed to anything outside of my personal network. So if we look at, for example, the guides, you'll see I've got, for each of the different products that we've got on HeadwayRocket, I've got a guide for. If I open that up, you'll see it's got all these different custom fields that I just literally fill out, and it's really, really nice to use. The field types, it's got support for normal, like a normal WYSIWYG or Markdown. It's got this really nice split view, which I've kind of fallen in love with. It's a good sign when I go here to actually write my blog post, because it helps having a kind of visual aid while you're writing, seeing the structure of the post or the document coming together. And again, using Markdown, it just makes everything really efficient. And there is actually a plugin which does the same sort of split view in WordPress. But again, because I'm using Cockpit, it makes sense that this is what I'd be writing. And if we just go back now to the actual guides type, I can just give you a quick look at. So this is one of the things that really kind of drew me to Cockpit, was that it had the the ability to create custom post types off the bat, and that there were no assumptions. Like when you create a new post type, when you literally, if you want a title, you add a title. If you want a slug, you add a slug. It starts from ground zero. There's like nothing, no assumptions made, and to me that's absolutely perfect. So I've got the title and the ability to choose how many columns each of these fields take up. Each of the fields take up is a really nice touch, because with a slug, path, and type, each of these are just short text fields that don't require like an entire row, so it makes the entire form really efficient. And then you'll see on the content, set to Markdown. These are all the different. You could have it linked to an asset, a boolean, custom code if you wanted a color picker, date, file, gallery, some HTML code, an image, location on a map, Markdown, multiple. I mean, it's just like really comprehensive. And this is without installing any plugins or anything. I thought that was pretty cool. At the moment, I'm kind of like still adding some HTML, like to output the videos and navigation, but I'm looking at ways to kind of utilize Cockpit a bit more once I get to know the options a bit better. And then over here, I'm able to determine whether these individual fields display in the list view, and I can decide whether they're sortable and whether they show in this top drop down. Overall, I mean, this is on a kind of a, not even a beta, and it's really stable. I haven't come across any issues yet. There's definitely some areas of improvement that like when it comes to the fields, but I guess that'll come with time. For now, this gives me an amazing, really efficient way of, even if I'm on the road, I can write my blog posts offline, and when I'm ready, I just publish them and have them automatically compile to static. And yeah, if you didn't know already, the advantage with static is that there's 0 requests made to the server. There's no database to process, there's no PHP to process. everything is just flat. It's and especially when it's on a decent hosting stack, like DigitalOcean, on the $5 plan even, you could have multiple static sites and they would be blazing fast. Especially when you combine it with something like Cloudflare. Um, so yeah, that's it for this video. I hope you found it useful, and yeah, let me know what you think in the comments.